This week's Still Untitled is brought to you by Udemy, the largest marketplace for online learning. Whether you're looking to learn something new or just sharpen your skills, Udemy has over 65,000 courses starting at just $11.99. Students around the world choose Udemy to discover new passions, expand their skills, and even change careers. To learn more, visit ude.my/untitled or download the Udemy app to learn anytime, anywhere. Now on with the show. Welcome to Still Untitled, the Adam Savage Project. I'm Norm.
I'm Adam.
And our special guest today is...
Evan Narcisse.
Evan Narcisse.
I didn't know I was going to introduce myself. Yeah.
Welcome, Evan. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. This is, pop-up podcasts. You guys emailed me earlier this week and asked me to be. I'm like, well, why do they want me? So you can answer the question live now in front of this audience.
Well, we want you because we're fans of your work.
Well, we're fans of your work
you.
and all of the scope of it, from IO9 to Black Panther, etc.
You're a senior writer at IO9.
Yeah, I am.
And you also are currently writing, or maybe you're all written, but the ongoing, or recently released Rise of the Black Panther miniseries.
Yeah, it's a miniseries that started in January. Issue 4 just came out, and I've been writing that for the last couple of months.
Wow. So crazy.
Yeah, it's been utterly surreal. It's a word I've been using over and over again, talking about my experience, going from a journalist and a critic, somebody who's written like evaluatory kind of articles and essays about my comics consumption and Black Panther in particular, and now like adding to the lore that I had once explained to people as part of my job. It's very, very weird. But also very fun.
And in adding to the lore, I love that I read an interview where you were talking about you wanted to do a year one, which is one of my all-time favorite Batman comics.
Yeah.
And it must be incredible. You're a fan of the franchise, but to go in and realize that you get to actually come up with stuff deep in its history that will grid onto what's already happened.
So, and it's... Part of how this happened is I'm a critic, right? And part of how this happened is I'm friends with Ta-Nehisi Coates, and his editor, after I interviewed Ta-Nehisi, his editor was like, hey, Evan really seems to know his Black Panther lore. Do you think he'd be interested in writing a project for us? And so we had some initial talks. And the reason this is all happening is because, the criticism is what gave me the knowledge base and the kind of understanding mechanically of how comics work. And, I'm still learning a lot as I go, but it's weird to make that transition and contribute to the lore. One of the whole reason I mentioned being a critic is what I love about these long-lived legacy superhero characters now is I feel like the only game in town in terms of approaching them is you have to embrace the multivalence of their existences, right? So one of my favorite titles right now is Tom King's Batman because, he's pulling in stuff from like the 60s. The small example is what he's done with Kite Man. And Kite Man was like a throwaway joke character like the 1950s, right? Back when they did Villain of the Month stuff, right? He starts using him. He shows up. For like the first year of his Batman run, Kite Man would get on his huge hang glider, crash into somebody's room at a fancy dinner party, snatch some jewels, go out another window, and say, "Kite Man, hell yeah!" And people were like, "What is he doing?" And so he gives you a year of that, but then he does a flashback storyline, the War of Jokes and Riddles, that had the Joker and Riddler fighting each other, and then he shows you, oh, he had a son who had cancer, and they used to fly kites together, and he died as a result of the machinations of the Riddler. So, embracing the layers, nature of the medium is something that I always responded positively as a critic. Yeah. And now I get to do it as a creator. So, the year one thing, like you mentioned, is I knew this story hadn't been told. I knew that the story of T'Challa introducing Wakanda to the world in the comics had never been told. And so I felt that was my opportunity. Ironically enough, the movie is very much concerned with the same thing. And I always say that notionally we share the same space, but I get to use all the toys. So in issue 2 of the series, I get to have Namor show up. I get to have Bucky show up in issue 3.
You have Captain America in the very first issue.
Yes, yeah.
In World War II.
And that's established lore, right? It was writers before me had written a meeting between Steve Rogers and the Black Panther of the 1940s, right? So all I did was I encapsulated that scene, but what I wanted to do that was new was show the repercussions of that moment inside Wakanda, which you'd never seen before. Wow. So like after that encounter happens, we show T'Challa's dad, as an adult, and he's talking to an elder tribal member who basically says, "Yeah, your dad never should have given that white boy our vibranium, because now people know this exists and they're going to come for us." And it shows like political repercussions and the attitudes of Wakanda towards the outside world. And then T'Challa wanted to change them. I ramble, so
I'm curious about that. So I want to talk about the shift from writing criticism and chronicling comic books to actually writing them. Early on in the Still Untitled podcast, we were talking about a franchise film that had come out, and I made an offhand comment about the quality of the special effects. And then the special effects supervisor, who it turned out that I knew and I wasn't paying attention, wrote to me and said, "I'd love to hear your specific problems with the special effects because I respect your opinion." And I realized, shit, I'm not paying enough attention.
Who listens?
Right? These people are listening. I'm not just bloviating out into the void. However, the internet is a very reasonable conduit for bloviating into the void. And there's a lot more different kinds of criticism. There's all this snark and there's all this. So how do you, I'm curious, like as someone who loves comic books and still might review some of your friends' work and take it to task, the balance between going from that to being a creator. So
I have a super funny and super relevant experience. I wrote a review of a movie about a year and change ago that I had problems with. And the reason I had to write a review of this movie is because our usual film critic, Jermaine Lucier, was tied up and he couldn't go to a screening. So it fell on me. In the course of writing this review, some other friends I have were like, "Hey, mutual friend of ours wrote on this." And I was like, "Oh, okay." And I mentioned to this person that was like, "Well, okay, well, I'm going to try and be fair. I'm not going to try and be mean." And I recently had a conversation with a friend who worked on the movie, and I was like, "I hope you understand." He's like, "Of course I understand." He's like, "Look, we know when people are being mean just to be mean, right?
Right.
We know when people are not being substantive, right? So, it is a weird place to find myself in. And it's even weirder because, I'm but a mere human. So I look at criticism of my own work. Now that I have actual creative work out in the world, I wonder what people think about it. So you see the positives and the negatives, but it is a weird thing making that shift because I feel like ultimately I'm just trying to write the kind of comic book that I would enjoy, right? Mm-hmm. Like, I know that I'm delivering a denser than average comic book compared to the norm right now, but I that's what I grew up loving, and that's what I feel like. I have a lot of different considerations. I feel like one, $4 is a lot for a single issue of a comic, right? Mm-hmm. I want people to feel like they're getting their money's worth. Two, like when I think about the nature of the characters that I'm writing, like I had a conversation with some other friends of mine, some other critics. She was like, the Black Panther and Wakandans, they hold forth, right? They extemporize.
Give speeches, yeah.
Right. And I feel like, I've got to be true to my understanding of the character in that way. And also I feel like, this is a project that is kind of intentionally geared towards people who might have never read this character in comics before, who might have seen the movie as like, hey, I wonder what else is out there. And, that kind of requires me to make sure that people are understanding each issue on its own strength, without having read, 40 years of comics before it. But I also want the people who've read 40 years of comics to enjoy it, and one of the great things about the feedback I've been getting is if you're like, I see what you're doing there. You did that thing where you mentioned this thing. And from that issue, I'm like, yeah, you're right, you did. I did. But the other interesting thing has been, just 2 days ago, I got a tweet. So the latest issue of the series is Rise of the Black Panther #4, which is focusing on Dr. Doom. And Minor spoilers for anybody who ain't read it, sorry. But at one point, Doom gives T'Challa like this aperitif made out of an extinct berry, which he basically resurrected through magic and science. And T'Challa's like, this tastes great. But somebody on Twitter pinged me and said, hey, watch out, that's the berry drink from Fantastic Four Annual Number 2, written in 1960 whatever, written by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. And I'm like, you know what? I responded to the guy on Twitter. I was like, this wasn't even top of mind for me. Like, it's not like I'm going to make this reference. I just happened to coincidentally, like, I guess it bubbled up from like my subconscious, but the same kind of thing. And I was like, God damn. You really can't escape this stuff.
I mean, we hear that from like Star Wars writers when they jump in, and of course there's like a keeper of the lore and the canon. Yeah. Is that also the case for comics, where someone at Marvel is like editing your work? And
you guys will appreciate this with tested and the science stuff. No and yes. On one hand, before I started doing any writing, I read as much Black Panther as I could. On the other hand, you know, I did have I availed myself of research at Marvel at one point, because one of my main questions was, you know, vibranium in the comics absorbs energy and vibration, right? So how do they mine it?
Carefully coaxing it.
Right. So one of the things that was never answered was like, well, how do they mine it? You know, if you go at it with a jackhammer, it ain't moving.
No.
And that led to another plot point for me. I created this class of workers in Wakanda called Extraction Masters, who basically, we know how to coax it out.
Right.
And it's funny, I didn't have the time or the space to kind of put my theory of how they would do it, but it's just like, we know how to do it. They know how to do it.
It's negative space mining. You have to mine around it, right?
You can separate it from the surrounding rock very gently. One of the things that was established in the previous run of Black Panther, Christopher Priest's run that started in 1998, he had T'Challa wear a vibranium weave suit, and it could absorb small arms fire and energy. But if you cut against the grain, you can break open the material like that.
Yeah.
So that's essentially the same idea, is that you would have to separate the vibranium from the raw rock around it, and then refine it later on. But I'm not going to go into my head canon for vibranium, because we'd be here all day. But these are things you have to consider that haven't been done before. And part of why I feel like I'm able to do that is I've been a critic who's been like, okay, you catalog, you critique, you extrapolate from the stories that have already been told,
and you contextualize.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the thing I've been trying to do with this series, is like, you know, let's take the character of Shuri, for example. Breakout character in the movie, right? Mm-hmm. Shuri in the comics was created in 2005 by Reginald Hudlin. T'Challa appeared in 1966. So he went 40 some odd years without having a sister.
Right.
And my thing is, I'm writing a prequel, so now I've got to act like she's been around the whole time. Mm-hmm. And was the toughest character for me to crack initially, because the stories of T'Challa that I read as a young man growing up, he was always lonely, you know, kind of heavy, lies ahead that wears a crown, kind of tortured, a lot of weight of responsibility. In the Christopher Priest series that I love from 1998, T'Challa was emotionally opaque. You can't read him. He was a master strategist, right? 3 steps ahead of his enemies, 5 steps ahead of his friends. So my thing is, well, I want to write a version of T'Challa that will still honor that. But I've also got to make sure that Shuri's around. Because in my head, if you're sitting around brooding on the throne, well, I got to go to war to Dr. Doom, and she would walk up, smack him with the backside of his head, be like, come on, snap out of it. You know, you're the king. You find another way. So that's kind of a relationship I wrote in the series, like some sibling rivalry. She'll always take him down a peg, give him shit. And the great thing was, my editor on the series, after he saw early screening of the movie, he's like, you know what's great is that relationship in the movie exists in the comics now because of you. And I had no idea what they were doing.
So they didn't tell you?
No. So there's funny things with, like, part of this series is also a bit of a secret origin for Killmonger too. In the comics, Killmonger shows up, I want to say in 1978, created by Don McGregor, and I think Rich Buckler. Killmonger just shows up. His story, his previous backstory in the comics was he was exiled from Wakanda because I think either his parents or somebody worked with Claw during that initial skirmish where T'Chaka dies. Mm-hmm. He's living outside of Wakanda, basically calls up T'Challa on the phone, like, hey, it'd be great if I could go back home. And it's a hilarious scene to me in how, like, non-dramatic it is. T'Challa lands a plane on the roof, and there's one scene where he's carrying boxes up the stairs with Killmonger to take him back home to Wakanda.
It's like his record albums and his books and stuff.
Right. I need these, my Desert Island discs. But part of my approach to Killmonger is like, okay, well, you spent all this time away from this isolationist, xenophobic country. You spent time outside the outsiders and the others. What did that do to you? And again, I came to that completely independent of whatever plans the Joe Robert Cole and Ryan Coogler were making for their version of Killmonger in the movie. They are eerily resonant with each other.
That speaks deeply to the depth of the backstory.
Yeah.
Right? That you guys are both going to look at this from two totally different vantage points and come to the same conclusion looking at the long arcs of these characters. Yeah. That tells something really significant.
Once you start from the place that Wakanda is an isolationist country, secret, hidden, and advanced, I feel like the psychologies of the characters suggest themselves to you in very strong ways.
Speaking of thinking about that kind of stuff and working out the narratives, we live in in my opinion, very dark time. And
darkest timeline, Adam?
Yes, this is the dystopic future we didn't order. Yeah. And frankly, the success of Black Panther feels like part of the solution. Does that inform how you're writing?
I mean, it's a lot to put on one movie, right? Sure. Even if it did make $1 billion. It does inform part of my writing. Like, I'm a child of immigrants, Haitian American immigrants. While I'm writing this series, the President of the United States calls.
You can curse on this podcast.
Yeah, thank you. Calls the country where my parents came from, the country that forms part of my identity, a shithole. He calls Haiti and other countries a shithole, and I'm like, well, Wakanda's not real. But what Wakanda is an amalgamation of survival strategies that Black diasporan peoples have created and maintained so that they can survive in a system that is built to deny them rights and franchise. So Wakanda's not real, but it draws on real things, real cultural practices. And am I going to put that in my Black Panther series that I'm writing in 2018? Fuck yes. Donald J. Trump may never read Rise of the Black Panther, but valorizing the struggles of Black peoples throughout time is part of what makes Wakanda such an energetic fictional concept. And there's no way I wouldn't do that. But also the thing that's great about the movie and what I feel like people like me and Ta-Nehisi and other writers are trying to do with Black Panther stories written in the latter day is, let's not center it on the stereotypes of the past. Let's not, let's have it be about Black glory and accomplishment, and not, one of the things about the movie and the comics is that, so often when you see mainstream media portrayals of Africa, it's sickness, unrest, corruption, turmoil. And, those are overwhelmingly, I think, the tropes that follow portrayals of Africa in mainstream media. And what's great about this moment that Black Panther is creating is that it doesn't have to be like that. I kind of treat Killmonger like a refugee in Rise of the Black Panther, but he's a refugee from America. He's repatriating. He's not coming back to food shortages and illness and whatnot. He's coming back to an idealized version of what black people can achieve or could have achieved without colonialism. And his psychological problem is he has an ideological vision for Wakanda that was perverted by his time outside of Wakanda. So then how do you reconcile that? So yeah.
Does that make him a more interesting character, right?
Yeah. It's funny, I love writing T'Challa because I feel like the reason I became a fan of the Black Panther as a young man was like it was very readily apparent to me that he's a character who stands at the crossroads between tradition and modernity. And again, another one of those weird synchronicities. There's a video where Ryan Coogler is breaking down a fight scene.
Yeah.
So you've seen it, right? And he says the tension is between tradition and innovation. And I'm like, wow, money, get out of my head. But like that's the appeal of T'Challa as a character, right? Like he has this long tradition of unbroken black excellence and achievement in Wakanda. And they've managed that by being isolationists, right? Mm-hmm. The choice he realizes is being isolationist is not going to be in Wakanda's best interest moving forward. I compare it to telling a kid you can't have chocolate milk, right? The kid knows about chocolate milk, has tasted it, but you tell them, hey, it's not good for you, you can't have it, or special times only, but they know it's in the fridge. That just makes it want more, right? And to me, Wakanda and vibranium are the chocolate milk, and the outside world is the kid. And they're like, keep on banging on the doors, we want this chocolate milk. And what T'Challa has to realize is like, okay, we've got to let them know the chocolate milk is here. And if you act nice, maybe you can have some. But hiding it, acting like we don't exist, is ultimately not sustainable. So he has to break traditions that have kept Wakanda safe in order to maintain its future safety. So I feel like these tensions like that are really interesting to me. And there's other characters like his stepmom, Ramonda, being a South African outsider who married his mom, his dad, and he has an adopted brother, Hunter, the White Wolf, who's one of my favorite characters in the whole Black Panther mythos, because you're the only white guy in Wakanda. Like it was a character that Christopher Priest created. It was kind of a subversion of the Tarzan myth, right? But instead of like you're not king of the apes, you are the lieutenant of the king, and he becomes an ultra nationalist. And I feel like he's such a fascinating character because what must be going through his head, Like you're like. He's like the adopted son. He's the eldest of the royal family, but you're never going to be king.
So I mean, each of us imbibes the different media and fiction and nonfiction that we do to help ourselves parse the world. And it sounds like the same thing's happening to you in writing it.
Yeah, it's funny. Like the first issue of Rise of the Black Panther, I had narrated by T'Challa's birth mother and his adopted mother because I was raised by a single mom, and mechanically in the story it serves a certain purpose, but it was a way for me to work out my own grief over my mom not being here anymore, acknowledging that I wouldn't be here doing what I was doing without her. You work out your stuff in the series. I was able to sneak in my twin brother and my sister as characters in the book.
That's awesome.
And the worldview of Wakanda, and talking about I got asked an interview question earlier this week, and it's like, well, if you were T'Challa, would you make the same decision to reveal Wakanda to the world? And I'm like, of course. We who I am, psychosocially or whatever. I don't believe in isolationism. I don't believe in not helping my fellow man.
Well, it felt like it was a recognition of their own privilege.
Yeah, that too. Wakanda's. This is something that Ta-Nehisi and I have talked about a bunch. But Wakanda, your average Wakandan is not a nice person. Well, your average Wakandan is screw the outside world. We're the shit. And they can go whatever. They can go perish. But one of the ways I treated that conundrum was in issue 2. After T'Challa's dad dies, his uncle Cyan became regent and basically ruled until T'Challa was going to assume the throne. T'Challa becomes Black Panther, becomes king, assumes his kingly duties, and he has a meeting with his family. It's like, we need to reckon with the outside world. We need to, and this is him mentally starting to move down that path, and I show him. There's a screen where he's showing different events from the Marvel Universe, like world-shaking events. So it's like the X-Men fighting Magneto. It's the Fantastic Four fighting Galactus, and it's like Thor fighting the Stillman from Saturn. Old classic 1960s Marvel stories. And I have T'Challa say to his uncle, so what would we have done if Professor Richards and his team fell before the world devourer? Would we have beat our war drums and sung about being unconquered while the Earth's crust boiled around us? Being an isolationist ain't going to help you in that kind of situation.
Right.
And, it's a great way to message the ideas of global cooperation and through the fictional construct of the Marvel Universe. So, yeah.
I want to go to the moment where you get called by Marvel to write this. You write a script, but then you get to see for the first time art.
Listen, man.
What was that like?
So I haven't talked about this publicly, but I finished the 6th and last issue of it a little while ago, which means at some point in the near future, I won't be getting art from Amazing Art. Right. And this is an emotional crash that I'm going to need to go sit on the beach somewhere and deal
what's
with.
that collaboration like?
It's good. It's great. So, the process, comics are assembly line. So I write a script. After working out the major beats and outline with my editors, I write a script. It gets sent to my editor. We go back and forth for notes and refinement, and then it gets sent to an artist. The artist draws it. Sometimes I'll get rough layouts and breakdowns. Sometimes I won't. And then it goes to a colorist and a letterer, and I get lettered pages back to, again, kind of like, all right, this is next to final. Let's lock it in and send it to the printer. So when the art comes in, it's always been amazing. It's stunning. I've had a few different artists on this series, and they've all been absolutely stellar. There's stuff. I go back and read issue 1, which was drawn by Paul Renaud, a French artist who's great. And I get all verklempt. There's a scene where young T'Challa is playing hide and seek with Ramonda, and I'm like, he nailed it so hard. It's so good.
So then the artist is adding stuff to
your
very
narrative.
Much so.
Yeah, no, I got issue 1 back, and I had written this 2-page spread, big fight scene. I'm like, we're gonna have it go from left to right, and then right to left, and then so on and so forth, like a whole zigzag thing. And I got the pages back. I'm like, this is not what I wrote. This is actually better.
Well, it's like a screenwriter not needing to write the action.
Right. And it's very different. Comics are so weird in such a hybrid form in that way, where I wrote a piece earlier this week about, and the headline was things I didn't know about writing comics until I wrote comics, and I talk about the first thing was freezing a moment in time, because you've got to pick that panel. Has to be okay, it has to stand by itself, but also inform the next thing. Right? There's a weird sense of implied flow. And it's hard because you're okay, T'Challa walks into a room. Do I want to show him opening the door? Is the door already open? Is he meeting somebody? Is he talking to somebody on the other side? Is, standing up, sitting down? So all things like that. Okay, you've got to be able to picture it in your mind. And the visual storytelling aspect of it has been the hardest thing. The great thing about that story, we tweeted it out on IO9. And Neil Gaiman replied to the tweet and was like, it's even funnier when you consider that the left-hand side of a comic book panel happens earlier in time. Yeah. One panel than the right-hand side. I'm like, this is why you're the dream king and I'm some newbie who's just trying to hang on.
It's why I love reading the physical comic, because I want the page turn.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And thinking about okay, you assume that people are going to follow from one page to the next. Yeah. But, I've learned other tools through my great editors. Here's how you can make sure that people are make those transitions in a different way. Wow. So, yeah, it's been a lot to learn mechanically.
I'm assuming this will radically change the next time you critique
a comic. Yeah, it already has. Yeah. It already has. I remember when Ta-Nehisi started writing his Black Panther run, he's like, the colors, man, the colors. He's got a great colorist, Laura Martin, on his initial run. I don't know if she's still doing the book, but one of the best in the business. And I'm like, yo, man, I've been reading comics my whole life. I know what you're talking about. You're like, whatever, just calm down, all right? Then my pages start to come in, and you're like, oh my God, the colors. And he's like, see? But you learn so much about how a colorist can draw your eye subconsciously across the page, you know?
Right.
I remember I got issue 2 in, and the colorist on the series is a brilliant guy, Stefan Patko. And the first page was a big fight scene, the first page of issue 2. And I'm like, he's doing the thing. And look, he's got the light source there so that your eye goes here. And I'm like, and guys, I didn't write any of that.
So we're on Tessiter often covering the making of movies, and we love pointing out that from the director is thought of as the creative center of the film, but below him is an army of thousands of people, all of them involved in the storytelling, all of them invested in the narrative, and you're explaining that the same thing exists in comics.
It's funny because I wrote a piece about Blade Runner 2049 about the lighting and how light is a visual metaphor in that, and the DP was Roger Deakins, if I remember correctly.
Yep.
He won, right?
He did.
Yeah, he did.
Finally.
First one, yeah.
He won an Oscar for those of us, those of y'all who may not necessarily know what I'm talking about. But the way that they use light in that movie, and there's typical cliched ways of film noir lighting, right? But he goes beyond that. Like anytime you see something in clear light, like that scene where Jared Leto and Harrison Ford are in the office, they're both clearly lit. You can see everything that's going on. It's unobscured. And that is the least trustworthy scene in the movie.
Wow.
You're like, wait a minute. This guy is not trustworthy. We don't even know what Deckard is talking about, if he's telling the truth or not. Like, but is you can make out the most. Meanwhile, you know, you think about Kay's memories, the way they're lit, smoky, hazy, all that stuff is hard to make out, but it turns out to be emotionally truer than some of his other experiences.
And the same thing that the story, the memory writer says, is that real memories are an absolute mess.
Yeah. And, you know, did they talk about that? Maybe, but that's what came out on the celluloid, and it's freaking amazing.
I love hearing that collaboration cascades all the way through all the layers.
Yeah.
Even
and
probably to the lettering, I'm assuming.
Yes, very much so. I wrote, in the piece I wrote, is that like letterers, you know, it's not just the words that the characters are saying, it's the rhythms in which they're saying it. So like the way where a balloon is in relation to another balloon, the shape of a balloon, whether it's words get highlighted, that's the line reading from a character.
It's my favorite comic balloon is from Elektra Assassin, when Chastity shows up and you get to see Garrett go, oh shit, Chastity. And the balloon is this giant icicle with Chastity as the tiniest thing in the middle.
And somebody made that decision, right? So this is stuff, again, you kind of know it intellectually when you're reading comics as a critic, but to be part of the process experientially is something totally different.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So it's been a wild ride. Yeah.
Wow, we can't wait to read more. Rise of the Black Panther, issue 4.
Issue 4 just came out. It's coming out monthly, so issue 5 will be out the first week of May, and issue 6, the last issue, will be out the first week in June. I just checked with my editor, and the trade paperback collection is going to be out August 1st.
Awesome.
In comic book stores, and then 2 weeks after that in bookstores.
And people can read your regular writing.
Yeah, you can read my regular writing on IO9 every day when I make my deadlines. io9.gizmodo.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Evan.
Thank you for having me, guys.
And thank you out there for listening. We'll see you next week.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.